966.
It's our privilege to welcome back onto the 966 Mr. Chris Johnson, who is joining us from Riyadh. Chris is managing attorney and at the law firm Johnson & Pump in association with Sharif Law Firm, and he produces an absolutely fantastic weekly newsletter called Saudi Business Continuity Updates, which both Richard and I very much enjoy. This week, we'll be taking full advantage of our time with Chris to discuss Saudi Arabia's new personal data privacy law, the kingdom's new investment law, and private sector participation program and how it fits into Vision 2030. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us once again on the 966 today.
Always an honor and a pleasure.
Well, it's our honor and our pleasure. As I was saying, the pace of change in Saudi Arabia is so brisk right now, and it's new things coming up, new legislation, changing regulatory environment. So we always look forward to the opportunity to sit with you, Chris, and try and understand these things better. And you join a very hallowed group, a pantheon of the 966 guests. One of only two to be a repeat offender. And we're really delighted you're here. And I want to make sure, Chris, I want to echo what Lucian said about that Saudi business continuity updates. They're really, really good. I also want to make sure that we pay some attention to all the good work you're doing with AmCham KSA. You're deeply involved in a number of initiatives, I think, but in particular that diplomatic dialogue we can touch on later, and also that your public-private partnerships program, which is fascinating. But let's lead off with personal data privacy law. And just as context, in September 2021, Saudi Arabia issued its personal data protection law to regulate the processing of personal data. The PDPL, we'll call it, is the first federal data privacy legislation in Saudi Arabia and was to come into effect on March 23rd. However, day before the PDPL was to take effect on March 22nd, the Saudi Data and Artificial Intelligence Authority delayed enforcement until March 17th, 2023, after adding a one-year statutory grace period. Full enforcement has thus been delayed until March of 2024. Chris, this is an interesting process. Clearly, they're trying to update and bring into order their privacy laws, and it looks like they got ahead of themselves. And what's happening now with this?
Many of my clients were extremely worried that the new law would have required localization of their data in ways that would have made their market unprofitable, and they would have had to close down their operations. I think that message got through, that it had such a broad brush to it and so little assurance that there would be exemptions as appropriate, and some lack of sensitivity to the way that we really do operate in a global environment. And it's just not cost effective to replicate your enterprise software and your data hosting in each country in which you operate. And so, many of our clients in financial services and many other sectors were preparing contingency plans to close down their Saudi business. And so I think that realization is what prompted this rethink. So my own hope and guess is that not only will we have a postponement, we'll have a radical rewrite in which there's a more balanced and parts of the data privacy law are very good. That this is, we're always pushing Saudi Arabia on the human rights front. Well, privacy of individuals, that's an important human rights area. So I'm glad they're focusing on that, though I also think there needs to be a balance between protection of individual personal data versus efficient business services organized on a global basis.
Yeah, some of the reporting had likened it to the only as stringent as one that exists in China. In this period now that it's been postponed a little bit, is SDAIA asking for input? Is there a means to input? Is there a framework for the business community and others to express their concerns and maybe help redraft it?
I think it's more a government-to-government thing. I think it's in response to pressures from embassies that this has been done. So most of the input opportunities, there are some laws, and I'm not 100% sure whether it applies to any of the data privacy laws where they do solicit stakeholder input. But my observation is that it's taken seriously when a foreign government that's an important trade partner weighs in, like the US or the UK.
Well, that's good. That's very good. So this is one of the, we're putting you in a difficult spot because the first three topics we're talking about are hypotheticals in the sense that they haven't come into play. So this PDPL obviously was intended to be enacted on March 23rd, but it's been postponed. So we don't know how that's going to come out. But is this an improved and elevated? I mean, was this a response to the initial draft and initial personal data privacy law? Was this in response to a need in terms of the Saudi market and in terms of making it attractive to foreign investment, or what was the genesis behind updating in this law, the PDPL?
Well, all over the world, there have been initiatives to protect data privacy in the context of scandals about leaks and breaches. And the European Union has really been the forerunner, and they have quite a severe localization requirement that has been moderated somewhat in discussions with the US and others. But I think Saudi Arabia felt inspired by what was happening elsewhere to also protect the data of their citizens and residents, and also to express their national sovereign pride in wanting to be a business center in which companies operate and localize their activities, including their data.
And I think that's the theme of a lot of the things we're going to be talking about. So another soon, potentially enacted bit of, enacting some change in the regulatory environment. So the Saudi Ministry of Investment announced on April 7th that it is drafting a new investment law that will provide for the equal treatment of local and foreign investors in respect of direct investments in the kingdom. The law aims to support the principle of competitive neutrality and fairness and to ensure equal opportunities in the treatment of direct investments made by public and private investors. So this is, when something like this happens, Chris, this is announced. Does that essentially indicate that it's going to happen, or do these things get shelved later on? Or what do you think of this?
I think it expresses a genuine felt need by certain agencies, probably led by the Ministry of Investment, to demonstrate to foreign and global companies that Saudi Arabia is open for business in a very hospitable and even-handed way. And there's been a relative shortage of response to the privatization program, for example. And there's an assumption in Vision 2030. There's certainly not enough government money to fund all the programs and all the initiatives for privatization that have been put forward. And so I think this is a signal to the international foreign investment sources that Saudi Arabia takes their interests seriously and wants to be business and investor friendly.
What does it mean if it were to be enacted? What does it mean on the ground practically? I mean, and is it an issue for Saudi firms?
Well, it will be. If they have to compete on equal playing field with foreign investors, what will that mean practically? Well, I think it would mean that they would need to equalize their tax treatment. When Saudi Arabia joined the WTO in 2005, they were given an exemption on the national treatment principle with respect to taxation. And so they were allowed to introduce a 20% corporate income tax on foreigners while applying only the zakat 2.5% on net worth Islamic tax on their citizens. I think that there's an example where there is no national treatment. So I think if they really are serious about balancing and providing equal opportunity for foreign and local firms, they'll have to equalize the tax. That's one specific example, but there are many others as well. They would have to, I think, revisit their negative list of sectors that are reserved for Saudi only, and they wouldn't take. I think they could still err on the side of national security and reserving certain areas that really do have a security aspect for Saudi firms only. But things like trading, I think they would have to look at allowing foreign firms to come in and compete in retail and wholesale with Saudi companies without having to invest 30 million riyals over what is it, 300 million over 5 years, which is the minimum required to qualify for 100% foreign-owned trading license right now.
And had that negative list, has it decreased over the years? Is it still pretty? What's on that negative list?
Certain things having to do with military procurement and security guards and certain publications and they have loosened it up. Ground transportation was on the list; it's been taken off. I think advertising is still on the list. There has been some effective lobbying by the Ministry of Investment to remove more things from the list, and so I'm hoping that they'll really do a radical revamp there.
Fascinating. And the holy grail really is in these days is foreign investment. And well, there's many things that they have prioritized, but foreign investment, trying to increase that and really enhance it, get it deeper and stronger and wider is a major priority for them, and that infuses this equal treatment potential, law. That's sort of the carrot. The Project HQ is a little bit of a stick. And just for context, in January 2021, Saudi Arabia announced that international businesses without regional headquarters in Saudi Arabia may not be able to contract with agencies, institutions, and fund owned by the Saudi government, effective January 1, 2024. Is this, I know you're doing a diplomatic dialogue with AmCham KSA, and you hosted one recently. Is this one of the things that is part of that discussion, the diplomatic dialogue, the HQ project, the Project HQ?
That was the subject of our latest event that Neil Crompton, the British ambassador, hosted at his residence. We had Chow Ming Chow, the Singapore ambassador, and we had Martina Strong, the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires on the panel. And that was the topic. We called it Building Business Hubs. And so we tried to present some case studies from those three countries, the US, the UK, and Singapore, of what has worked and how to go about encouraging companies. And we tried to give it a spin that the carrot is much more effective than the stick. The stick scares people, and it sounds like coercion. And so what we tried to do in a very indirect and diplomatic way is to say that if your goal is to build a business hub in King Abdullah Financial District, you're going to have a lot more success if you try to compete on positive terms rather than on threats. And so that was sort of our approach. And I think we got a pretty positive response. And I think that there are a lot of sensible voices within the government that are appreciative that they have to make it attractive. It's not enough to say that you'll be deprived of opportunity if you don't do it.
And what does attractive mean? I mean, is that a tax thing? Is that a school thing? Is that a quality of life thing?
Well, I think it's primarily an ease of business thing. It's that you're going to come in here and you're going to encounter a regulatory system that is no less problematic and aggressive and adversarial, that is no more problematic than what you are familiar with and what the other competitors for this global capital are offering. And so, I think my advice to the government would be, look at where the problems are, the perceived problems, and the U.S. Embassy and others have been quite clear in identifying areas of concern to their stakeholders in their own business communities. And one is that the Saudization quotas are, in many cases, very pro-Custian and very aggressive and difficult to achieve, and so there you need to be a little more flexible in terms, similar to what the U.S. or Singapore do, where you do give preference to Saudi candidates, but if there are none who are qualified, you're given an easier road to bringing in people who are from your own business world. And also there have been a lot of tax issues where the ZATCA, the tax department, has been not very transparent or predictable, and sometimes perceived to be arbitrary and imposing big retroactive assessments in ways that have really been very problematic for a lot of foreign investors. And I think there are other areas. The system for legalizing documents abroad is extremely cumbersome. Saudi Arabia nominally has signed the Hague Convention on Apostille, but Apostille does not work here. You have to go the old traditional way of notarizing and going through all the hoops, right through consularization at a Saudi embassy. And this can take 6 months now in the U.S. And so that's a huge wet blanket on getting businesses up and running. If you need to have fully legalized powers of attorney and corporate resolutions and constitutional documents, and these have to go through the U.S. Department of State and the State Department of State and the Saudi consulate, that this is extremely cumbersome. Then it comes here and it has to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Interior. The whole process can delay your incorporation by 6 or 8 months.
So as a point of reference, the sort of benchmark here is the Emirates. How long does it take to do that in the Emirates?
I think they're much more efficient. I haven't heard the complaints from there, but that's not my field.
Right. The Saudization and that whole process that began, I think, back in 2011 has been a fascinating journey, forward, backwards, adapt, change, redirect that's a particular at that level to say. So if you're a foreign firm and you're going, all right, we need to meet these quotas, and we're going to make this job available, but there are no appropriate Saudi candidates. That's a hard one to monitor.
They did have a system for a while where you could send your needs to the Ministry of Human Resources, and they had a web page where candidates could apply, and you could either hire those candidates, or you could give reasons why they didn't meet your specifications, and then you would be allowed to get a visa block. So that's in some ways the first step towards what Singapore and the U.S. do. But in many fields, there's no real understanding of the rationale behind this. In my field, for example, in the legal field, our quota for Saudization is 50% among our professionals. So the lawyers, we have to have 50%. And in my business, I serve foreign clients. That's our niche. So, we are sort of heavily weighted towards American and European and other foreign jurisdictions, because that's where our clients come from. So we have to arbitrarily recruit 50% of our staff. Well, that's more than we need in terms of our particular business profile. Now that's going up to 70% in August, and I don't know how we'll do that. It'll sort of ruin our business plan. And but there's no real avenue to have a discussion about this. So that is very problematic in a lot of sectors.
And what are the fines involved if you can't meet that number?
Well, it's not a fine. They close you down. Your business services are suspended, and you can no longer get visas, and your bank accounts will be closed. You have to be in compliance if you want your government services to be maintained.
How frequently is that happening?
Well, it does happen to a lot of our clients, when they unexpectedly, because of unplanned attrition, they have their services closed down, and then they call us, and we go into full gear to help them get it fixed.
On that tax assessment, surprise tax assessment, are we talking the Uber Kareem, or there are more examples of that?
Oh, there are many examples. I'd say it's not half, but maybe a quarter or a third of my foreign clients have serious tax problems right now.
And is that a matter of unforeseen assessments, or just difficult regulations to adhere to?
Well, it's what I see is overreaching interpretations of their statute, where they seem to be looking for ways to enhance revenue and by interpreting ambiguities to their benefit. But to their credit, they do have a mediation committee, and we have had some good results by taking some of these issues there.
When the HQ Project HQ was announced, one of the things, they noted that 44 multinational companies, including PepsiCo, Baker Hughes, Halliburton, Phillips, Schlumberger, and Novartis, have relocated their regional headquarters to the kingdom. I was talking with a consultant just the other day, and he was saying one of the things might do is it might actually lead to more M&A, where a large multinational will acquire a Saudi counterpart in Saudi Arabia and designate that as their a headquarters. So in other words, is that eligible? Is that adequate to do this, or is that something you might be seeing?
Well, to qualify as a regional headquarters, it cannot be a commercial entity. It has to be a support entity. So if you were to acquire a business that has clients and that has revenues, that would not satisfy the requirement. And so it's more akin to a technical and scientific office that has a support role for its corporate group, for its sister companies. I think that it would not satisfy that requirement if you were to acquire an ongoing business.
And just to clarify, this affects companies seeking government tenders, government contracts, not private sector. So we're basically 18 months away from when this is enacted. Are you seeing movement, Chris?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have one client, I don't want to name names, but that has already been licensed and is up and running as a regional headquarters.
So, and that's an example. So it's as we said, it's a stick, and your diplomatic dialogue suggests maybe carrots would be better, but it is inducing some of that change they're hoping to see.
It's focused a lot of companies that are dependent on the government as their clients to really come up with plans on how to satisfy that requirement. Yep.
Yeah, they seem to feel it will bring a lot of investment, a lot of capital into Riyadh, and be part of their refashioning of Riyadh and growth of Riyadh. Fascinating. So that's two sort of things in process. Three, actually: the PDPL, the new business law, seeing equity between foreign and domestic firms, and now this HQ process. Can we talk a little bit, Chris, about the private sector participation initiative that you're doing with AmCham KSA, and And just to give me, this is you. I'll let you run with this because, and you can, and if you would, you can give it a context of why it's so important in terms of their Vision 2030 and why AmCham KSA decided to really focus on it. But I guess for the next 6 months, AmCham KSA is organizing 6 conferences and roundtables where all players involved in the Saudi privatization program will take the stage to introduce their projects. And I won't go any further into that, but can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with this program?
Yeah, it's been slow in a birthing. It's been promised with Vision 2030 for however many years, 5 or 6 years. There's been a lot of delay as they fine-tune their new regulations and roll out their privatization laws, but they are now out since March. And so the time has come, and they're getting very organized. I think they've identified 17 sectors, and they've set up committees to monitor and simplify and streamline the approval process so that they won't require Council of Ministers approval of each new project. It can be done on an expedited basis. And I think they've identified 20 projects that they want to conclude by the end of the year and another 20 or more for next year. And I think they're absolutely serious. They've set up a national infrastructure fund that will help with the finance that's teamed with BlackRock and will help to accelerate the implementation of this project. They seem to be quite flexible on structure and also on choice of law, which is very reassuring to foreign investors. So there's a lot to like in this program. And I think they're planning to sort of follow the model of what you saw in the UK in the 80s and 90s, where a lot of nationalized companies in transportation and medicine and healthcare and a wide range of sectors were privatized, and they plan to go much further than that. And they've looked at models in Australia and Canada that are still very active in privatizing, and they're trying to radically transform their economy. And so I'm expecting there will be a seismic shift in the next 5 to 10 years, and you'll see a totally different landscape.
Can you help me a little bit with vocabulary? Private sector, so privatization and public-private partnerships. Are they the same thing? I mean, I think of privatization, the aviation, recent aviation summit, they're trying to privatize 29 airports eventually. These independent water and power projects that they're inviting people to bid on. I mean, are these, can you help us understand, is there a distinction? What are we talking about here?
I think the goal ideally will be to put all these assets in private hands. And there may be some exceptions where the government continues to retain a shareholding, but I think the overall objective is to shift the operating element of lots of, as I say, 17 different categories that include healthcare, hospitals, education, schools, as you say, a lot of logistical facilities, airports, seaports. I'm thinking roads. I think it'll be extremely broad. And in what sense is it a public-private partnership? Well, the public has hitherto been the owner and the operator, and the private has been the constructor, the construction contractor under the procurement regulations. Well, this will change. The private investors will become the owners and the operators, and the government role will be radically shifted from being the owner operator to being the regulator. And so there's going to be a different mentality and a different responsibility. And I think both sides will have to totally rethink what they do and who they are. I think one of the questions that we had last night that I thought was very good was, what does it take to make a success of this retooling of the relationship. It'll take a lot of forbearance and trust on both sides. And so there needs to be and so there the word partnership becomes key. If you look at the US, there are a lot of regulatory relationships that are not partnerships. They're very adversarial. If you look at the IRS or the INS for getting residency, or if you look at the SEC, it's like a police function. And so I think there was, one theme that resonated, I think, on both the private and the public side of my panel, is that we want to have trust and relationship and partnership between the regulator and the investor. And so if they achieve that, God bless them. That'll be huge in terms of encouraging investment, both domestic and foreign.
Well, it's interesting that AmCham KSA has made it such a marquee issue for them, that they want to position themselves as a champion of this process, and I think, as you pointed, it's a bridge between public and private sectors. So it's clearly an important issue for the AmCham KSA as well.
Well, we had 150 people sign up. We were sold out, and there was huge interest.
And was this the first of 6?
Yes.
And they're going to be. You're going to take place all around. You're going to take place in Jeddah, Riyadh, and the Eastern Province. It's going to be around the kingdom.
Yes, it will be. And we got the top people from the key agencies, from the National Center for Privatization and the National Infrastructure Fund, and people from major companies, including Jacobs from the U.S. was on my panel. And I think American companies need to look at this very seriously. And that's our opinion at the AmCham, that this is for real, and that there are going to be serious opportunities that you'll neglect at your peril. There's certainly a lot of interest from Korea and China and Europe. The U.S. has been a little slow, but I think that we're the natural partners. I think there's a cultural affinity between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. that you don't see with Asia or elsewhere to the same degree. And I think other things being equal, Saudi companies prefer to work with American because they know the culture and they trust the quality and the integrity.
How large is the AmCham KSA these days?
We have 400 some members, and so that's a mix of individuals and corporate, but I think we're several hundred corporate and lots of individuals who join in their personal capacities.
You have an unparalleled understanding of the trajectory and arc of the chambers of commerce over the AmCham KSA. That number 400, how does that compare to previous highs or lows?
We're down. The COVID was devastating for all networking organizations, particularly ours. We live and die on big networking events like we had last. And during COVID, that was impossible. And so, what's the value of joining an organization that's operating online and virtually and with video conference? That's just not the way the world works in the Middle East. It's face to face or nothing.
You've said that before, and you said that's a very meaningful context in building any kind of relationship.
Well, and the Arabs, I have to hand it to them. They're very relationship oriented. To me, that's a good thing. That they're very skillful at developing and maintaining relationships of trust and mutual benefit. And I often say that sometimes the American South, whether it's Texas or Alabama or Georgia, that they have a great advantage here, because that's true in the South as well. That unlike New York, which is what have you done for me recently, and transactionally oriented, the South is relationship oriented. Well, that's a natural for succeeding in this environment.
Fascinating. Now, I wanted to. I added just this morning, and you kindly agreed. I said, and one part of the reason I did this, in your updates, Saudi continuity updates, occasionally you wax poetic, which I really enjoy. You talk about your personal, perspective on things. So in a recent one, and the lead was Saudi corruption, and in retreat ? And this is what you wrote. Unlike such moral reprobates as Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Venezuela, Iran, and similarly inclined havens in Africa, Asia, and beyond, Saudi Arabia has in many ways planted its flag among the angels. Consistent with an unambiguous Sharia prohibition, the Prophet Muhammad clearly and broadly condemned, quote, briber, bribee, and facilitator, unquote, alike. Corruption has been targeted as a serious problem. And then you go on to offer a chronology. So anyway, I mean, again, like I said, I really like it when you you go eloquent like that. What is the state of corruption? We read about and hear about Nazaha, and it appears to be that's an active and independent agency that is out there doing good in terms of fighting corruption. But what's the current situation? What's your assessment currently?
Well, they are certainly very visible. We get texts on our cell phones all the time saying, if you see anything improper, let us know and we'll take it from there. And I think they are. And I've had some clients who have had brushes with the Nazaha. I think they're serious, and I think they're very proactive, and it's a positive development overall. I think that it's timely in the context of what we're seeing in the Russia-Ukraine context. That's focused attention on ways in which there's been a lot of corruption in some of the countries on the Russian side of the former Soviet Union, and how we've been very accommodating of their desires to recycle national money through personal hands into real estate in London and New York and Miami and the like. And so I think it's a climate where increasingly there will be attention focused, just like on the human rights side, countries get in trouble when they play fast and loose with human rights. I think you're going to see it more and more on the kleptocracy side. And so, God willing, this campaign will take note of trends elsewhere and will align. And as a recent head of the G20 and having participated in some of these initiatives to adopt better practices in ESG and a wide range of other sort of cutting edge improvements in corporate and business culture, I hope that that sinks in deep in terms of anti-corruption as well.
Well, it seems PIF, the Public Investment Fund, is involved in so many aspects of the economy, and I have heard discussion that their attention to detail and to international standards, and hewing to international standards is a big influence. I mean, it sort of sets a benchmark and how all business is to be handled, and is a good, in essence, and a good model. Is that accurate?
I think so. The head of the chief governance compliance officer is a Canadian woman who's a friend of mine, and she's very knowledgeable and seems quite confident that she has the ear of the top people in terms of nurturing and inculcating some of the best practices globally into the PIF approach. So I think the answer is I'm very encouraged by what I see and hear.
So we'll go with that lovely paragraph that you wrote. We'll go with the things are progressing in the right direction in terms of corruption.
I think there's a lot to be said in the kingdom's favor in terms of their anti-corruption commitment. I think the news is generally good. Yep.
Now, so since you mentioned Ukraine, it's politically, and we'll ask you to go up a little bit. The response from Saudi Arabia and the UAE and many emerging markets across the globe to the U.S. EU call for solidarity in terms of their position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the rather tepid response. What's your take on this?
Yeah, my take is that Russia has fundamentally violated the essential rules that were developed after World War II in terms of how do we avoid similar catastrophes to what we've just been through ever happening again. And one of the core principles was inviolability of borders. And so that's kind of a red line, and the Russians crossed that. And that should be obvious to everybody, including in this region, that this is a serious problem that cannot be ignored. I would love to have seen a more proactive and responsive indication of understanding that this is the type of behavior that threatens everybody, particularly in this region, being close as they are to to Russia, and it commands a more proactive and clear-cut response in terms of standing up to that kind of armed aggression. So I'm still hoping that there'll be a change of heart and that we'll see a more supportive approach. And we have seen that in the UAE. The UAE, when they were approached by the Ukrainian embassy and asked for humanitarian aid, it was delivered within a week. I think there's a sort of divided opinion in this region, but I think the UAE called it right, and I'd love to see the Saudis get on board.
And I guess the Saudis sent a small amount of humanitarian aid too. Yeah, it's a diplomatic challenge, I think, for these Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and UAE in particular, because of their relationship through the OPEC Plus with Russia. And I think there's a it's not a notion, but the idea of a rule-based international order is attractive, and as you say, I think is especially important to states in that region that it be abided by. But yes, we talked with John Alterman recently, who introduced the term hedging just before the Russia invaded Ukraine, and hedging is what the Gulf states are doing largely.
Well, hedging is good, but you need to be discerning about your hedges, and you don't want to hedge with a bully.
There you go. There you go.
Well said.
Yeah, Lucian, jump in.
I think you've got it. I couldn't possibly jump in and sully this awesome conversation.
Well, Chris, again, it's when we talk about changes and things that are going in Saudi Arabia, there's just many, and it's a bit of a fire hose in terms of these things. And so we picked 4 issues that we wanted to bring up with you. Are there issues that are coming across your desk every day that, in terms of business and particularly in terms of U.S. companies being successful in Saudi Arabia, that we may have overlooked?
American companies have been gun shy about coming in. We do get some, but the big investments are missing. And what we do see is related to the Giga project. So it's all responding to procurement needs. But in terms of coming in, proactively and strongly, I'd say there still is some human rights concerns. And so you do have some examples of both individuals and companies that are in line with some of the Democratic congressmen in terms of redlining Saudi Arabia for human rights concerns. I think the kingdom has taken that to heart. And, I think that what happened in Istanbul has not been repeated. I think that's to their credit. And so at some point, I think assuming that there are no more incidents of that nature, there needs to be a willingness to balance that unfortunate incident with the reality that we still need each other for many reasons, and that the basis of our relationship, based on our unique ability to provide security and the other things that they like about us, of which there are many, our educational system, our culture, many of their social and cultural reforms are in many ways inspired by what we have in the U.S. Their entertainment initiatives in Riyadh Street and other similar things feature American artists. There's clearly an emotional affinity. They watch American films. English is the language of the business world and beyond. In the bigger picture, both Saudi Arabia and the U.S. need each other. When we came to the rescue of the kingdom threatened by Saddam Hussein in 1990, that was extremely consequential. Now, we would like to see a similar reciprocal response to what we see as an existential threat from what Russia is doing on the threshold of Europe. All of these things are being weighed in the balance, not only by our government, but also by our companies. And I think Saudi Arabia would like to be closer to the U.S. There are rumors of a Biden presidential visit to Saudi Arabia. I hope that happens, and I hope that it succeeds in reopening some doors that seem to be closing.
Fascinating. A couple of questions, Chris. In terms of the Gulf War and the U.S. coming to assist and participate in removing Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, that seems to be replaced by a more recent sentiment. That a sense of being let down by the UAE and the Saudis and Saudi Arabia being let down by their responses to attacks on their homeland, both in the Emirates and the Saudi Arabia. And I wonder if that one that sentiment prevails more than others. But the second question, and you referenced Jamal Khashoggi and you referenced human rights. When a U.S. corporate comes in and is looking at possibly investing, becoming more involved in Saudi Arabia, are they taking these things in? Is that a factor in their decision? Are they concerned, for example, about detentions or the Khashoggi murder? Because are those weighty considerations for them?
If they come from California, yes, and sometimes beyond. But the trends in the U.S. and the business world are towards giving greater latitude to stakeholders, investors, and private equity funds in determining policies, and that there's a debate that's been ongoing for decades about what are the responsibilities of corporate directors and officers. As Milton Friedman said, singularly focused on profitability, or does it extend beyond that to the environmental, social, governmental governance concerns, and being a good steward of the public environment and this sort of a thing. And so I'd say that there's a trend that does extend into the human rights area that public corporations are influenced by. And so there is a evaluation. They want their money to be ethically invested, and so they there is a greater weight given at the corporate decision-making level to, does this country meet our standards in terms of where we'd like to put our trust and put our shareholders' money.
And so you're essentially talking about boards of directors and who are sensitive to the larger issue and perhaps public relations at home. That's interesting. So California is notably more sensitive to this is that correct? Do I read you right?
Well, if you follow the press and see the companies that have withdrawn from Saudi Arabia, they're largely from Hollywood or San Francisco or Silicon Valley.
Right, and that's an aftermath of 2018. But yeah, it just seems to me currently, especially with the growth and some of the things that are going on in Saudi Arabia and the attractiveness of the market. I mean, the top concerns would be some of the things you laid out: the quotas, the tax, the documentation, delays, that sort of thing. And it's interesting to hear you say that there are still, I guess, political risk or reputational issues for a company coming in, which you see it firsthand. So that's interesting.
Well, and as we've been sort of reminded by some of the abuses of power in Russia under Putin, where he's been able to unilaterally and without any real accountability or input from his advisors, seemingly has been able to take the country down some very problematic paths. That sort of what you see in Ukraine is reminiscent of what you saw in Europe in 1938 and 1939, where Germany also had some very elaborate theories about why they had been provoked by Poland and by Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia and France and others, and in their minds they were the victims, and so they created this alternate reality. It's been an interesting study. What is similar in Russia today to what happened in Germany in the 30s, and there's a really interesting theorist. His name is Ernst Fraenkel, who was a Jewish lawyer in the 30s in Germany, who got out just in time in 1938 and landed in Chicago, where he was hired by the University of Chicago, and he wrote a book called The Dual State, and he talked about what happened in March of 1933 when Hitler was given dictatorial powers, and he called it the dual state, and he talked about the normative state that operated independently of the executive and that was predictable and that was fair-handed, and you could count on a even-handed justice. And so that created an environment where people invested and where the country became very prosperous and attracted a lot of trust and investment. And Germany became the industrial powerhouse of the world under the normative state. But then as of March of 1933, we saw a new parallel entity that he called the prerogative state. And the prerogative state had jurisdiction over jurisdiction. It was able to suspend the operation of the normative state at its sole discretion and sole unaccountable discretion. And Hitler abused that terribly. And that's really politically, according to Ernst Fraenkel, the origin of World War II. And I think you can see something similar in terms of the origin of the Ukraine invasion. And so to the extent that other countries in the world have a prerogative state that can arbitrarily suspend the operations of the normative state, it's sort of a formula for disquiet among American investors, I would say.
Well, it's ironic's not the term, but that parallel you just talked about with regard to Vladimir Putin, is particularly striking when he talks about going into Ukraine to fight Nazi sympathizers. And when what you're saying is very much the reverse. Chris, thank you very much. We really appreciate your taking time, and it's nice to we've had our first episode with you. We had you in your home. This one we have you in your office. Our next one, maybe somewhere out in the desert.
You're welcome anytime, both of you.
Chris Johnson, thank you so much. Joining us from Riyadh, managing attorney at the law firm Johnson & Pump in association with Sharif Law Firm. Great conversation. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you both for including me again, for making me a second time guest, and may there be many more.
Repeat offender is what Richard said.
Yes, Lucian, we need to get some complimentary mugs so we can give them to our special guests.